Just one sec. I started the recording. So thank you for coming, everyone. Once again, a reminder, we can't see or hear you. So if you have something to say, a question, comment, whatever, you can use the chat if you go to the bottom of your screen and set it to all panelists and attendees. And now I will pass it over to Brooke, who will introduce our panelists tonight.
All right, well, thanks so much, Lucas, for having us. Everyone in attendance, thank you so much for joining us. So I'm Brooke, I'm from the Long Island Health Collaborative. We work with the New York Coalition for Transportation Safety to bring you the Walk Safe Long Island initiative, much of which is educational programming like what you're attending this evening. So as you can see, this program is all about staying safe on our streets, all about bike and pedestrian safety. Just a little more about our respective organizations before we get started here. And as I mentioned, the collaborative works with the coalition to bring you Walk Safe Long Island, these educational programs. And as you'll see at the end of this program, there's also a scholarship opportunity for our teen attendees. So please stay tuned for that. So let's meet our panelists. First up, we have Cindy Brown. She is the Executive Director of the New York Coalition for Transportation Safety.
Good evening.
Hey, Cindy. Also on the panel is Mark Hofacker, Program Director at NYCTS, the Coalition.
Hi, everyone.
We're also joined by Lowell Wolf, Program Director here at NYCTS, the Coalition.
Good evening.
And two members of our team who are behind the scenes, but very important, Lynn, Margaret Brown, and Liz Lee. And now before I turn it over to Cindy, we just have a few poll questions to gauge your knowledge. So Lucas is going to launch those polls, if you wouldn't mind just answering these questions we have for you. Lucas, it'd be great if we give it the full minute and then we can move on. Great.
Sounds good.
Thank you. So I think everyone can see it, but so this first question is just, do you feel safe walking in your neighborhood? We just have a yes, no, sometimes.
Yeah, if everyone could let me know. Okay, I see at least one person put through.
Thank you. Awesome. All right, so 15 more seconds if, okay, perfect.
All right.
No, that's great. Thank you, Lucas. Okay, so thank you all for your input. And I am going to turn it over to Cindy.
All right, let's talk a little bit about why we're doing this. Why do we need some kind of a public workshop on pedestrian and bicycle safety? And really, it's because in the last couple of years, and particularly since the advent of COVID, the number of pedestrian deaths in a couple of locations on Long Island are actually the highest in the state for pedestrian fatalities. And I know a lot of people think that, you know, being in the suburbs or Eastern Long Island where homes are further apart and so on and so forth, that it makes it safer. But a lot of times what it really does is allow vehicles to speed or to go faster, and there aren't any sidewalks. And people are really not that familiar with what laws the state has that would help protect them. And so one of the things we want to do is to raise the awareness of, we want to give you the best practices information, and we want to raise awareness to any new type of transportation devices, so to speak, that are coming onto the market right now, such as scooters, electric bikes, e-bikes, e-motor scooters. And to tell you that there are laws that were passed only last year, not even a year ago, concerning these vehicles, but it's really a law that just more or less allows them to be legal in New York State. And as I said, a lot has changed with COVID-19 as regards statistics for people being injured or, hurt in a crash, considering that there were so many less cars on the road. All right, next. One of the things this program does through a very wide variety of methods, such as Facebook and not instant messaging, but messaging and devices such as the essay contest that we're running and different videos and all. It's a way to get the message out so that laws that pertain to pedestrians and bicyclists become much more widely known. We want to know what hindrances are to pedestrians so that they can cross safely. We want to know what roadway enhancements, and let you know what roadway enhancements that make it easier for you to cross the street, and what roadway designs work and do actually keep you safer and prevent crashes. And then we want to introduce you to these new micro mobility devices that I spoke about before, such as the e-scooters and whatever. All right, next. These are just to show you why we're really doing this program. If you notice, these crashes all took place in the last month, and there are a variety of scenarios. One pedestrian was struck by a garbage truck, God forbid. Another one was a teen who was injured in a crash. Another is a man who was found deceased along a Long Island roadway. He was a hit and run. There was a Massapequa man with his dog who were fatally struck while walking. And then there was a pedestrian who died after being struck by another one being struck by a vehicle. So those are the most recent crashes, but it's one of the reasons that the death rate is pedestrian fatality and crash rate is so high in part of Long Island. Mostly the areas that have really nice villages and towns where people would want to choose to walk. Okay. As I said before, US pedestrian death rates are a record increase despite less driving. So what that means is that even though there are way less miles being driven in the United States, the number of people who are killed in car crashes has gone up. It's like when we keep track of it, it's almost like an epidemic, that there's at least one a week, and sometimes 2 and 3 times a week. And it's really frightening because you're out there walking and you don't really have much protection from a vehicle that weighs a couple tons. So you really need to know how to protect yourself. Okay.
And Cindy, I would say there's been a lot of hit and runs, and it's also related to the fact that there are less eyes on the road. So sometimes if a pedestrian or cyclist gets struck by a vehicle, and our little survey said that speeding cars, I think, were the #1 concern, nobody sees it. And that's, sometimes nobody will see it, so people drive off. So that's a big problem, that we're encountering lately.
Yes. All right. So, but there really are specific laws that New York State has that are intended to protect the pedestrian, such as crossing street at marked crosswalks. Motorists have the right at unmarked crosswalks or intersections, but pedestrians should use the marked walks then where the signals are, because that helps them. You should always obey the walk, don't walk signs, which now many times have, we'll show it to you in a minute, but it's a timed intersection. It tells you how long you actually have to get across the street. One of the main causes of pedestrian deaths is that a pedestrian is walking with their back to traffic. A pedestrian, if there is no sidewalk, should always walk facing traffic. Pedestrians also have the right of way when a car is pulling in or out of traffic or across a sidewalk, like from a driveway. But again, I would caution the pedestrian to be careful, because not everybody has a camera in their car that allows them to see what's behind them. And if you happen to be a few feet either side of the driveway, even with the camera, they might not see you. One of the best things to do is to make eye contact with the driver, if at all possible. Just, sort of raise your hand, wave it a little bit, and make sure that they indicate that they see you. Also, pedestrians are not allowed on limited access roads such as expressways and interstates, and they are not allowed entrance or exit ramps either. And I realize that sometimes you might have to stop because you have a flat tire or an emergency with your car, where technically you would be considered a pedestrian, but it's very, very dangerous. So you should always make sure that you get as far out of the traffic lanes as possible, because those cars are really coming at a very high rate of speed, and it's very dangerous. Next. All right, Lowell, you want to take this?
I'll take it, or Lo, we can both take it. I would just have a few local photographs, and just to mention, your library, you've got Middle Country Road, which the speed limit might be about 45 there, which is a pretty high speed limit, for a local road. So I don't know if anybody here walks or bikes when they go to the library, but you're in a somewhat busy area in terms of traffic and speeding cars. It might be hard to cross Middle Country Road. Next. So the red circle shows you there's a bike rack there in front of your library. Most libraries have a bike rack, so you can cycle to the library. You also see you have a sidewalk. If there is a
Plenty of sidewalks.
Yeah, we'll talk more about sidewalks, but things are obviously a lot safer if there is a sidewalk. So use the sidewalk if you're walking to the library. You have bike parking there as well as car parking, for however you go. And I guess from what I hear, some people take the bus to the library too, which is good. Next. So this again really just shows the sidewalk, shows your entrance into getting into the library. Next. I mean, this is interesting. I wonder if anybody, you do have a bike lane. That's an unprotected bike lane. We'll talk a little bit more about the different type of infrastructure. I don't know if anybody uses that bike lane on Middle Country Road. It's good that it's there, but it could be a protected bike lane. You would be a little bit safer if it was a protected bike lane. Next.
The question here is, do you feel safe walking in your neighborhood? And I noticed that when the survey was just submitted, that several individuals indicated that there were issues with sidewalks, both lack of sidewalks as well as broken sidewalks. Those are two significant concerns. What we have obviously on the left is the ideal situation. There are crosswalks that are properly painted. In addition, you see individuals walking in large groups. There's safety in numbers in the sense that it's easier to see a group of people walking than an individual. Obviously, the situation that you have on the right side is not very desirable. Besides the fact that both the lady with the walker and the dog, she's walking incorrectly as far as walking in the same direction as traffic. We're not supposed to do that. We want individuals to walk facing traffic so that there is a greater there's greater communication, eye contact, visualization on the part of the driver. This way, there's a better opportunity for the drivers to know that you're out there. Again, obviously, this is not an ideal situation. There is no sidewalk, and unfortunately, this lady is forced to walk in the street. This becomes an issue of infrastructure. Quite often, you have older communities or rural communities that have grown up over the years due to suburbanization. And sometimes it takes a while for communities to catch up in terms of creating the infrastructure necessary for suitable for people who are in the community, like sidewalks. Pardon me, obviously that's missing on the right side. Okay, next, please. Okay, again, to stress how important it is to have sidewalks, what would you feel safer in terms of walking on? The picture on the left where there are no sidewalks, or the one on the right? You know, obviously most people would prefer to have the building of sidewalks, to have that available so that there's that safety factor. Unfortunately, not all communities have them, and that's where the risk factor increases for those who are walking right near traffic. One other thing that we didn't mention yet that's very important, we're looking at daytime scenes, and we're looking at relatively clear weather. But on days when there is heavy fog, which we quite often have here in Long Island, days that the weather is inclement, that it's cloudy out, or even during dusk and night hours, very important again to be seen. You need to have, and this is something that we don't always consider, but we need to, when we're walking during those time periods, when it's dark or when it's overcast, bright colored clothing that sticks out at night. The same way, if you're a cyclist, you would most likely have some type of device, or hopefully would have on your bicycle some kind of reflective device. We recommend the same thing. So very important during time periods when it's dark or the weather is inclement or it's cloudy, sure you're seen. And the best way to do that is to have bright colored clothing on. Next, please. Okay, pedestrian safety recommendations. Make sure to push the button to get the walk icon. Now, you might not think that that is important. It does make a difference because quite often, depending on where you're doing this, there are various push button devices that help people, pedestrians, cross the street. Quite often, if you do not press the button, you may not get the same amount of time that you would ordinarily get if you press the button to cross the street. Now, that's especially important for individuals who may have physical challenges where it takes them longer to get across a long intersection, a long street. It's very important to press that button no matter what, because it could make a difference as far as time is concerned. Once the walk icon comes on, you may now cross the street, but be sure to watch for turning vehicles. We mentioned before, Cindy had mentioned eye contact, very important. Just because you have the right of way and the light is green and it says walk, doesn't mean you should take it for granted that the drivers could see you. Especially beware of, as it states here, that trucks and buses cannot always see a pedestrian who is close to them. Try to signal the driver of this type of vehicle that you are crossing in front of them. What happens is, if you are close up, if you're in a large truck or in a bus and you're the operator, you're close up to making a corner turn, quite often you're not going to see that pedestrian in the street. You're very high up, and your vision is focused on a different view of the street than what you might expect. So you anticipate that, oh, well, the vehicle operator, the bus driver, they have the high ground. They must see everything. That's not the case. Quite often they will not see you at all. You may end up falling into their blind spot. And as you're crossing the street, again, the assumption is it says walk, I'm going to walk. And then, unfortunately, many people have received injuries. Some people have died. A number of people, I've heard of many cases, because Unfortunately, they were not observed by the operator of the vehicle. The trucks are just too high up, and quite often they don't see the pedestrians crossing. If you walk slowly or require the use of a cane or walker, always wait for a fresh green signal before crossing. Don't try to cross when you see that countdown and the numbers are getting pretty low. You're down to 5, 4, 3 seconds. Don't attempt it. If you are going to be needing to take extra time to cross that street, just wait. It's not, it's not that urgent to take the gamble. So again, when you're crossing, and this is a given, you should have your full senses about you. You shouldn't be on a phone texting. You shouldn't be playing a game, a video game. You should be concentrating on that road and assume that nobody is seeing you. If necessary, don't be embarrassed. As Cindy mentioned before, you wave, you put a hand up in the air, you make sure you have some kind of eye contact with those drivers, especially those that are interested in making a turn. Okay, next, please. All right, this is also kind of interesting. Other roadway designs and devices that can make it easier and safer for you to cross the street. Again, depending on which local government or which state roads you may be on. Here in Long Island, we have so many jurisdictions. We have state roads, we have local official village roads, we have town roads, we have county roads. There are different ways that the roads are laid out. There's no necessarily rhyme or reason, but there are things that could be done to improve the conditions for pedestrians. One of the examples is road diets to reduce vehicle speeds and the number of lanes pedestrians cross. You usually see this in areas that are more congested. Road diets mean that there may be an extension of the sidewalk going into the road. This would give pedestrians not only less time to have to cross where traffic is, they would have more time on the sidewalk to cross, but it would also ease the speed of traffic. Pedestrian refuge, you may find that on some larger roads where there's an island or some kind of division in the center of the roadway. They allow the pedestrians a safe place to wait, especially again, if we're talking about those who are physically challenged, slow walkers, the elderly. Maybe they need a rest. It's too much to cross a 60-foot, 80-foot long street. If there is some type of pedestrian refuge or island in the center of the road, that would be an ideal location to wait for the light to turn green in your favor. This is something that we don't see enough of, but some of the roads are improving. Raised crosswalks. In other words, this would give the driver of a vehicle the knowledge that they are entering an area where they need to slow down. They would actually feel the difference as they are driving. They would know they're in a crosswalk, even if they don't see any pedestrians. It would be a natural thing for them to want to slow their vehicle down. Crosswalk visibility enhancements, such as crosswalk lighting and enhanced signage, that's a given. Again, this is something that would be, again, common sense. Unfortunately, due to various reasons, whether it's government budget issues or possibly just poor design, quite often you'll find areas where maintenance has not kept up when it comes to painting crosswalks. Maybe there's not enough signage to tell operators of vehicles to slow down. These are things that all communities, and it's up to the individuals as well. Don't just expect government to know there's a problem and carry it out. Quite often, they may not be aware, and this is something that citizens, pedestrians, drivers alike should reach out and say, hey, let's do something about it. I see Lucas mentioned here, raised crosswalks seem like great conditioning for drivers. Yeah, that's just another excellent method of having drivers realize that these are areas where known pedestrians will be and that it's time to, reduce that speed. We're all pedestrians are concerned about speed on the road. Finally, leading pedestrian intervals, or LPIs, at signalized intersections. Those allow pedestrians to walk usually 3 or 4 seconds before vehicles get a green signal to turn left or right. Quite often you'll see that on large intersections. Also, getting back to that push button that we were talking about before for pedestrians, quite often, again, those extra 3 or 4 seconds, they will be initiated only when you press the button. That's why it's always important, depending on the pedestrian, the buttons that you're pressing at a particular intersection. Many of them will be tied to LPIs. That gives you those extra few seconds to get into the street, to cross before the the vehicle traffic gets their arrows to make left turns or right turns. So again,
Well, I'd also
address that.
like
Yeah.
to mention, it seems to fit in here, that for those of us who are drivers, as well as pedestrians and cyclists, the drivers, the most dangerous move that we make as drivers is left turns. And because a lot of times we rush our left turns, we don't square them off, we make aggressive left turns. And because of the way our eyes are looking, we're looking at the cars coming towards us, we don't notice the pedestrian or the cyclist who's in the crosswalk. So that's why a leading pedestrian interval, allowing pedestrians to go into the crosswalk and all the cars are stopped. I think that it's a great safety measure. And because people, if the pedestrians are going in the same time that someone is going to make an aggressive left turn, that's not a good situation.
Especially if they're in a rush and they don't see you. As you pointed out, those left turns are always much more dangerous than right turns.
Right.
You might have your eye focused on the right side as you're making a left turn to see if there's any oncoming traffic, and then you're going to clip a pedestrian possibly on the left. So, yeah, definitely. Very important. Next, please.
All right, so we're going to go over a few bike laws now. First, just to point out that there are in the New York State Vehicle and Traffic Law, which we all theoretically, for those of us who drive, we all theoretically, look through that to get our license. There's a pretty big section about bike laws. And before we go through the laws, I think it's helpful if people think of a bicycle as a vehicle. It's non-motorized, or almost most of them are non-motorized. But because it's a vehicle, we have to follow laws, and a lot of them are very similar to the laws that drivers would be, abiding by. So first of all, a larger thing, the second bullet here is, bicyclists have a legal right to share the road on highways. You don't go on the Southern State Parkway. You don't go on highways. That's dangerous. It's against the law. It's against the law to do that. If you're riding in the streets and you are, as the third bullet says, you ride with traffic, you ride as far to the right as you can. Very important, just to reinforce the third bullet, different than pedestrians. You're walking, you're facing cars if there's no sidewalk. Cyclists, you want to be in the traffic flow, so you ride on the same side that the cars are going. When there's a stop sign, you're supposed legally have to stop at the stop sign. I don't know that all cyclists do that. Stop at a red light, yield. You have to follow the traffic signals that cars would follow. So helmet law for New York State, so children under the age of 14 and over the age of 1 have to wear a helmet when they're on a bicycle. That's also true for skateboards, rollerblades, any non-motorized method of transportation. Now, we mentioned here about a year ago, Nassau County, localities can change the laws a little bit if they want to. And Nassau County changed the law to under the age of 18. If you're a parent, the child doesn't get a summons. The parents, I think it's pretty sure it's a $50 fine. They'll take the child home, and the parents are going to have to pay that $50 fine if the children aren't wearing a helmet. Next.
Mark, quick question.
Yeah.
What are the rules regarding cyclists on sidewalks?
Well, that's a good point. So in New York City, as an example, there is a law if you are over the age of 12, it's actually, or 14 maybe, it's actually illegal to ride on the sidewalk. It's a little fuzzier for rest of the state, but adults, it's best to think of sidewalks for pedestrians or people in wheelchairs. So adults, most of the time, should be riding out in the street. Now, I happen to think, I live near Merrick Road. If it makes sense to take the sidewalk, but I would try to avoid sidewalks for adults, and children obviously shouldn't be out in the street until they get a little bit older and they're better cyclists. So if you think about the bike itself, this is the law. And you have to have a white reflector in the front, a red reflector in the rear. Most of the times when you buy a bike, they're there, but not always, or if they break, they cost $1 or $2 to get a reflector. But just think for 1 second, it's white in the front like the headlights of a car. It's red in the back like brake lights on a car. Now, if, let's jump to the third one. So, but if you're riding at night, a little bit before dusk, a little bit before sunrise or a little after, you have to have lights on, you have to have lights on your bike. It's the law. You have to have a white light in the front and a red light in the back, not just a reflector. You got to put your lights on. That is, and Lowell kind of touched on it, when you're driving at night and if nobody has, if they don't have lights on their bicycle, like I think of myself as a good driver, but it's hard to see. It's hard to see if they don't have lights. The reflectors, there's also, most bikes have spoke reflectors, and they're pretty good because they help you, because you're perpendicular usually to the car and the wheels are moving, the cars can catch those spoke reflectors. So if you're, by law, you can, if possible, if you have the room, at most you can ride 2 abreast. And if a car is trying to pass you, you're supposed to make it into single file. Suffolk County just passed the law. It's the 3-foot law, if you've heard about it recently, which says if you're driving, passing a cyclist on the road, you have to give that cyclist at least 3 feet. It's kind of hard to know exactly what 3 feet is, but the point is to give them, some room. And a little known law, I don't even know many police officers necessarily know this, but, bike, you have to have a bell or a horn on your bike. And just like you'd have in a dangerous situation, you're driving, you honk your horn, you ring your bell or you blow your horn when you're on your bike. You can yell also to
Blow a whistle. Some people like to have whistles.
some people have, what the law technically is a bell or a horn. That's not, that's only, there's a lot more laws, and maybe we'll touch on a few more. Let's go next. I think we're gonna, okay, just to talk a little bit about helmets. Let me see, so I want to show you, I brought my own helmet here. So there's one thing to have a helmet, and I would say, actually, I'd say a few things about most good cyclists who are adults wear a helmet. They don't have to by law. Most you see today, when you see somebody riding a bicycle and they have their lights on during the day, that's probably a good cyclist. Even a lot of cyclists, like, drivers, are putting their lights on during the day because it's extra visibility. Generally, there are 2 types of helmets. This is a bike helmet. There's some helmets are called multi-sport helmets. They tend to have more protection in the back, and a multi-sport helmet is good if you do skateboarding, rollerblades or something, because you tend to fall backwards. In a bike, you tend to go forward. But the thing about helmets, you can have a helmet, but if you're not using it correctly, it's not going to help you too much. My helmets, like a lot of helmets, they're adjustable, just so you visually see. Like, that's not going to do me much good. I have a big head. It's hard to find a helmet. So I have to take my helmet, I make it as big as I can through the adjuster. You see it comes down further on my head. One thing we tell people, when you're putting it on, you're usually getting 1 or 2 fingers from your eyebrows to the bottom of the helmet. Before, it was 4 fingers. So it's going to come down here. On the side, there's this plastic that slides up and down. That you should slide that, or parents should slide it for the children. So it comes to the bottom of your ear. It kind of forms a V right here. You've got those 2. And then when you click your helmet, you want to get about 1 finger between your chin and your helmet. So then it's snug. And you can do this, shake it a little bit. When you wear a helmet correctly, helmets are very effective at reducing your risk of a brain injury if you fall. Just one thing about children, last bullet actually says, if you crack your helmet, replace the helmet. Helmets come in all different prices, but just getting a helmet. Just wanted to finish up by saying, with some of our experience with children, we see 9, 10-year-old kids who have really small helmets. It's like the first helmet that their parents ever bought them. Their heads are getting bigger and bigger, and they're wearing this tiny little Power Rangers helmet or something like that, and it's not protecting their head. It's a good investment to get the bike helmet, and it's not the law, but we all really should all wear helmets. Next. Whoa.
What we see here is an interesting situation. We discussed before the fact that you have protected and, in some streets, protected and unprotected bike lanes. Obviously, what's on the left here would be considered an unprotected bike lane. It is a dedicated lane. That means that that area is only for cyclists. Obviously, if a car has an emergency, they have to pull over. They do what they have to. But and that's hopefully what this driver did in the black sedan in the left picture. But that is technically illegal. That is a dedicated lane, just like you have lanes for cars. That's a lane for a bicycle. It's considered an unprotected lane. Unlike what we have on the right, which many of you I'm sure are familiar with, Route 347. They had that recent renovation of the whole road. They did a great job, the county, state funding, and they created dedicated safe bicycle pedestrian lanes, as you see in the right picture on the right side. That's what we would consider to be the ideal situation. In this case, the traffic is broken down between a left lane and a right lane. On the opposite picture, you would be in a dedicated bike lane. You would go in the direction that the vehicular traffic is going in, that the automobiles and trucks are going in. So ideally, we would love to see more of those protected bicycle lanes like you have on the right, on the picture on the upper right. Hopefully in the future, there will be more municipalities and more state governments that are putting funds into building those types of safe cyclist roads and cyclist lanes in this case. Next, please. Okay, here is a dangerous situation. We were talking before about the 3-foot law in Suffolk, and ideally that's what you would hope that most drivers and operators are going to follow. In the picture on the left, and again, like it states here, remain alert. Watch out for cars parked in bicycle lanes. We discussed that already. And drivers exiting their cars without looking. Again, as we saw in the previous slide, you have on the left side here, somebody who is possibly parked. We're not sure exactly. It's a little difficult to see. But either way, this cyclist is in a dangerous situation because the cyclist cannot know for sure whether or not the vehicle operator is about to open a door or not. And as you can see here, the cyclist has to do some type of last minute move to get out of the way, and very dangerous. Quite often we have individuals who are on the road. They're not aware that they have bicycles that they have to share the road with, these drivers, and the individuals might open a door up and boom, you're going to hit somebody. So here, it's a matter of common sense among both the operators of the vehicles as well as the cyclists to use some caution. But again, bear in mind there is that 3-foot law in New York State. I'm sorry, in Suffolk County, and hopefully it will be throughout New York State one day. And more operators of vehicles, we hope, will bear that in mind and try to keep some type of distance from cyclists. But as you can see here, this is a very dangerous situation. By the way, one other thing I wanted to bring out about cyclists and drivers. As a motor vehicle operator myself, I sometimes get really annoyed. I'll see the cyclists, they're following the law by following the flow of traffic, of motor vehicle traffic. They're in the right side between the curb and the traffic flow. But quite often, I'll see them wobbling, and it looks almost as if they're trying to come into my lane as a driver. And I get very frustrated because either I have to slam my brakes on or possibly try to avert the cyclist by moving into the left lane and maybe getting into an accident. Bear in mind, and this is something that all motor vehicle operators should bear in mind, quite often the cyclist is not being lackadaisical and just wobbling around on a bicycle without a thought in the world. They may have some type of obstruction blocking their path. Maybe there's a pothole. Maybe there's some kind of dangerous situation they're trying to avoid. So when you see a cyclist and they do make an evasive move, understand that there's probably a reason for that. And that's why motor vehicle operators sharing the road with cyclists always have to use that extra caution when they are passing by or near cyclists. Next slide, please.
I'll take this, Lowell. I spoke earlier about micromobility devices, and so here's a couple of pictures that you can see. And the most common one, I would imagine that anybody who's looking at this has probably seen a scooter. These scooters now are motorized. They're have battery packs, and some of them can go up to 30 or 40 miles an hour, fast enough that there are people who already want to hold road races with these devices. The other is a woman who is on an e-bike, which in this instance is a city bike, where in New York City and in a lot of other places they're not called city bike, but there are bikes that you can rent for an amount of money per hour, or even long term. They're very good. Well, for touring around certain places, and also for if you are a mile or two from public transportation, they're very helpful. There are other types of micromobility devices. And one of the things that's happening is that these devices are coming on the market much faster than our laws can keep up with them. So there's another one that is not a picture here, but it's a scooter that you sit on. And they went into effect in New York City about a year ago, right after the law went into effect. But then there was 2 serious deaths, fatalities involving these devices, and they pulled them off the market because you could just go and rent one of these without having any kind of experience with riding one. And again, they can go relatively fast. And now, even if you have dedicated lanes set aside for bicycles, you are going to have electric bikes, power assisted bikes, scooters, motor scooters, all fighting for the same amount of space. And a lot of them are going to come up on the sidewalk because there's not enough space. So we should be on the lookout for any kind of laws that govern this. Right now, there is a pilot program with the scooters that will be starting in the Bronx, but the real advantage to these little scooters and the e-scooters and the e-motorbikes is that the scooter in particular is not expensive. I mean, you could probably get one for less than $500. So if you go to a local school, or if you need to get to your train station, or, and it's a mile or two away, even to a bus stop, these are very convenient devices to have to get to them. And if you can lock them up the same as you would lock up your bike, then people will begin to use them for, for these types of instances. So there's very little data that exists to date about how safe they are, how they hold up, how long the battery lasts, how you have to charge it, or any of that kind of information. But there was so much of it coming onto the market that I'm sure you're going to be able to see, you're going to see a whole lot more about it.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
now,
I think that we have to think for those of us who are drivers, this is something new for us. How do you drive around an e-bike? Whenever I see somebody going pretty fast and they're not pedaling, I know they've got an electric bike, and they tend to take turns a lot faster. They're going at a higher speed than somebody who's actually pedaling. So we have problems sometimes riding around a regular cyclist, but these e-bikes are really coming. They're becoming a lot more popular.
yeah, one other thing you should note is that you don't have to be licensed. They don't require a license. They don't require insurance. They don't require registration. There are no laws that require this. So the e-bikes and the e-scooters can be pretty expensive. So they would have to be, if they were yours, you would want to lock them up. But if you were to have a crash with another vehicle, they would be the same as an uninsured driver. So it's really a whole new field, and it is something that we're going to have to consider, when we're talking about methods of transportation.
Also, unlike motorcycles, you don't hear them. If you're a vehicle operator, motor
They're
vehicle operator, they'll sneak up right on you, and you may not know that they are there, because unlike a motorcycle, you're not going to hear them. They're electric vehicles.
Exactly. Okay, next. All right, these are just some additional safety hints for pedestrians, and a lot of it's common sense. They're not really laws. That we discussed this before. You should walk on the sidewalk if there is one. When there isn't a sidewalk, you should always go facing traffic. The law actually does ask that you cross the street at a corner in a crosswalk, and especially if it's a signalized intersection. One thing that you might be interested in knowing, and this I'll tell you where you can find this information, is that most crashes involving pedestrians occur at a crosswalk in a signalized intersection with a vehicle that is making a turn. And most pedestrians who are injured are in the middle of a street where there is no crosswalk. So it's everything seems to go around crosswalks. And on this website, which is called, it's housed at the University in Albany, and it's called the Institute, it's ITSMA, Institute for Traffic Safety Management and Research. And any of you can go on there, and it has the information that comes from all the police reports of all the traffic crashes. And it tells you the leading cause of crashes, ages of people, times of day, anything that is on a report called the MV-104 that gets filled out if you're involved in a crash. And if you, or like us, we're trying to do prevention programs to keep you safe, you can research this data, and it helps you to understand what methods could you develop to try to keep people from being hurt or killed in car crashes, especially as pedestrians, because pedestrians are the most vulnerable population, as they don't have anything at all around them to keep them safe. So that's why, again, on these safety tips, we highly encourage you to wear brightly colored clothing. I know it's hard to think of it if you go out in the morning and it's sunny, but even if you have something, a sticker or a reflector or a wristband or something that you could put on yourself to make yourself visible. The other thing is to pay attention. And if you're busy talking on your cell phone and walking and looking and doing everything except paying attention to where you're walking, you are much more likely to be struck because you're distracted, and you're probably going to get struck by a driver who's distracted. So it's a good thing to just pay attention, especially for that short amount of time it takes you to cross the street. Now, some people, and this would be for pedestrians in particular, if you are walking at night and you don't need to really carry a flashlight, you can use your cell phone, but it is not a bad idea to light your way when you're actually at a corner where there is no signal and you're trying to cross the street. So that's really a just common sense thing to do.
You know,
Okay.
too often pedestrians have the attitude that, besides I mentioned earlier that they could see me, they being the motorist, there's also an attitude that, well, I have the right of way. That might be the case, but just because you have the right of way doesn't necessarily mean that it's a safe right of way. Right doesn't always make might and right don't always mix together. And right might be right, but might is going to be that car that could hit you. So common sense. Also, not to be a poet, but there was a famous rhyme from years ago: "Cross at the green, not in between." It still applies today. Very important. Don't cross in the middle of the road. Common sense.
Okay, next.
So
All right, Mark.
we got some more tips for cyclists. Let me say two things, and you can read the bullets. But one is, I think riding a bike, very important, is to try to be a consistent bike rider. You know, Lowell was talking about people weaving, but some people, they go fast, then they slow down. If you can have a consistent way of riding, it makes it a little bit easier for the driver, you know, to assess, you know, what type of cyclist you are. At this time of year, there's, you know, none of us, we're not bike mechanics at all, but I ride a bit. But so we teach kids this little thing, ABC, and A is for air. Check the air in your tires. If you haven't used your bike over the winter, you're probably going to need to pump them up a little bit. But your tires always lose air. So every now and then you got to pump up your tires, get them to the right pressure. B is for brakes. Check your brakes, make sure they're working. It's, you know, none of us would drive if we thought our brakes need work. So check your brakes. And C is just, you know, for chain. Make sure you've got the chain, you know, greased up a little bit. So let's see, the rest of the bullets.
I think we've covered it pretty much.
I think we've covered it. The law says the last bullet is, it's true for drivers too. If you are, a lot of people are using cell phones or listening to music, you can have 2 earbuds in at one time. That's against the law. You can only have one. I would say it's better to have none and pay attention to the road, but you can only use one. And you can also, kids will be more like, I haven't done it in a long time, but I certainly did as a kid. You know, if it's a bicycle built for one, you can only have one person on the bicycle. You know, you can't have somebody sitting on your handlebars or, you know, an extra person, you know, on your bicycle. But make sure the bike's in good working order. You know, I'm a big proponent of every few years, I get my bicycle tuned up. You know, I got a bike shop. I love the guy. You know, a tune-up is never going to be that expensive, because if they make it expensive, you just buy another bicycle. So for 40 or 50 bucks, he's going to check everything, you know, make, you know, stuff that I don't know about. He's going to make sure the bike is in good shape. And every few years, something is going to get loose, you know, so bring it in for a tune-up. Next. Thank you.
Right. Well, that brings us to our conclusion. Thank you so much to Middle Country Library for having us. Thank you to everyone in attendance. And of course, thank you to all of our panelists for sharing that really great information with us. Before we let you go, we do just want to let you know, if there's anyone in here who might be a high school senior, or if you might know of a high school senior, we do have a scholarship opportunity. It's just a 500 words or less essay. And there are going to be 2 winners, one in Nassau County, one in Suffolk County. $1,000 each. So some extra money for college is always a good thing. Please consider spreading the word. And before we take any of your questions, we just have one final poll. If Lucas, you wouldn't mind pulling that up, we just have two very brief questions for you. Just whether you learned something new today, and if you think that you'll feel a little safer now that you're armed with this knowledge that you learned here today.